This week in the Regency, it's all about Princess Caroline of Brunswick, who was the wife of the Prince Regent and who died after he became king. So, why do we call her Princess Caroline instead of Queen Caroline? Well, a clue to that comes from our story for the week. This is from a report in the Kentish Gazette on the 24th of June, about the day before, which is reporting on Parliament, in particular the House of Commons, where a debate was being held about Princess Caroline and how much money she should get every year. As far as Parliament could look at it, the separation between the prince and princess was perfectly hopeless and final, and it had so been considered by His Majesty. So how did it get to that point? Well, let's have a little look at Caroline of Brunswick. Now, she's a really interesting person. One of the things when you're writing historical fiction is that you try not to put modern people into the past. You have to have characters that have been shaped by their environment and who would genuinely be able to live there, you know. And then every so often you come across a historical character and you think she would just do fine today. And Caroline is one of those. I feel like Caroline would have thrived in this century. Unfortunately, she was caught 200 years ago. So who was she? Well, she was a princess by virtue of her mother. Her mother was Princess Augusta, and she was George III's sister. So she was the Prince Regent's first cousin. Caroline was first cousin. They had the same grandfather, who was George II. Her father was the Duke of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. I apologize for any German speakers. And the British, in the way that the British do, just decided that they'd call that Brunswick. So this was a very small duchy. Germany at that time was broken up into a whole lot of duchies and states. And the British kings were still kings of Hanover, electors of Hanover, as well as being on the throne of England, Scotland, and Wales. And they liked taking their brides from Germany. So Queen Charlotte, the Prince Regent's mother, had come from a small state in Germany. And so they went and looked again when they wanted to marry Prinny off. Now, in the previous video about the Prince Regent, we talked about his illegal marriage. This just postdates that. He was incredibly in debt, and they basically forced him to marry her. I just want to tell you a little bit about her upbringing, though, because she was 27 when she got married, which really is very late for a princess of that time. For example, Queen Charlotte was 17 when she got married. And she had had a very odd upbringing. They wouldn't let her dance. The only person she was ever allowed to dance with was her brother, and that was at her brother's wedding. She was never allowed to go to balls, usually. She was basically kept a prisoner in her own home, except for riding. She was allowed to ride, and she was allowed to visit the tenants on their estate, who were described as peasants in most histories. And it is said, and this is a woman, rumors followed her entire life, and we don't know if any of them were true or if all of them were true. But it was said that she was pregnant at 15. and that after that they really clamped down on her. And when she was allowed to go to a ball or a dance or something, she was allowed to turn up, but then she had to go and sit in the corner with old ladies and play whist. So they didn't trust her. They didn't trust her at all. But it was still really over the top for the time. I mean, even in a world where women were chaperoned, young women in particular were chaperoned very heavily, this was like, whoa, she wasn't even allowed to stand up and dance with her cousins. Um, and so the rumors got around, of course, that they were trying to stop this wild girl from being wild. And that was particularly pretty much why she didn't marry, we think, that people thought she wasn't a virgin. Um, so fast forward to her marriage with Prinny, um, and um, it was pilloried in the papers because everybody knew that he was in love with Maria Fitzherbert, that he would married her against the wishes of the king, but he was very, very much in debt. And so this cartoon from James Gilray um, shows us the kind of, this is called the wedding night. Everybody's heading off into the bedroom. That's Prinny in the red, and the woman with the fan over her face is supposed to be Caroline, showing maidenly modesty. But the point of it all is the £80,000 that the footman is carrying with him. And I love also this little detail of the Le Triomphe de l'amour, the triumph of love, is not really happening. So they got married. Before they got married, they only met that day. They hated each other. Right, like on first sight, they hated each other. And when they got married, despite all of the hoo-ha about it, they were not happy. Prinny wrote to a friend and said that he'd only ever had sex with her 3 times, twice on the wedding night and once on the next day. And after that, they avoided each other. And the word they both used to describe each other was disgust. Now, I have to say that this portrait of Prinny is incredibly flattering considering what he actually looked like at the time. And he was already, in his 40s and not well and overweight and apparently drunk at the wedding. I don't mean drunk after the wedding at the reception. I mean drunk as he took his vows. So it's easy to see why she might be disgusted with him. We don't know why he was disgusted with her, particularly because they seem to dislike each other on sight. But possibly she wasn't a virgin and he realized that. Who knows? But they really disliked each other intensely. However, those 3 sexual encounters produced a daughter, Princess Charlotte. And Caroline and Charlotte were very, very, very popular. She was the heir to the throne, and she remained the only heir to the throne for some time. She was the only grandchild of George III for quite a long time until Queen Victoria was born. But the marriage really was not happy, and in the late 1790s, he wrote to her, "We have unfortunately been obliged to acknowledge to each other that we cannot find happiness in our union. Let me therefore beg you to make the best of a situation unfortunate for us both." And what that meant was a formal separation. So she moved out of Carlton House and eventually ended up here at the old rectory in Charlton in London. Charlton's near Greenwich. And at that stage, it was not really in London. It was a carriage ride out. London was much smaller. But it was close enough that she could visit friends and so on, often by going down the river. Um, but she was still not very happy. She's looking glum here, I think. Sir Thomas Lawrence painted him several times. Um, and one of the reasons that she was glum was this woman, Frances Villiers, Countess of Jersey. She'd been appointed by Prinny to be Lady of the Bedchamber, and she went through all of Caroline's correspondence. She controlled her household, and all of this was done while she was Prinny's mistress. So you can understand why Caroline might not have been all that happy at the time. And here is a cartoon about Caroline. You see, we know it's Caroline because she has those three big ostrich feathers, which is the crest of the Prince of Wales. So that's the Princess of Wales coming in with a candle. And it's called the Jersey Smuggler Detected. And of course, Jersey was renowned as a smuggling island. So the important thing here is that popular opinion was on Caroline's side. She was very, very popular. And the more I researched her, the more I felt like this was like Prince Charles and Princess Diana when, he was Prince of Wales, and was involved with Camilla Parker Bowles. Not that Lady Jersey was the love of Prinny's life or anything like that, because he had, multiple mistresses and possibly up to 36 illegitimate children, right? So, but nonetheless, Caroline very much was seen as the wronged wife. And this was a period where people were turning against the Prince Regent. He was incredibly expensive, like just so incredibly expensive. So she moved to the old rectory and then later to Montague House. And she lived a very separate life there. She got rid of Lady Jersey and had a lot more freedom, basically, to live the life that she chose. And she was clearly a woman of the Enlightenment. She wasn't very well educated. I mean, they taught her English and French and left it at that, apparently. And it's interesting when we talk about impulsivity, and she was clearly quite impulsive, but also incredibly nice to people, very kind. She paid for a number of poor children to be adopted by local families and paid for their upkeep. She was very involved with sympathetic to the poor, and she was seen as a woman for the people. But then in 1806, her neighbour, Lady Douglas, accused her of adultery and a whole lot of other things. It was like, neighbour from hell thing, she's been sending us disgusting letters and blah, blah, and we don't know if any of this is true. But there was an investigation called the Delicate Investigation. And one of the focuses of that investigation was this boy, William Austen. Her neighbour accused Austen of being her son, her illegitimate son. And that was one of the focuses of, a number of quite high up political and noble figures were kind of the judges in this, and they investigated it all. Sophia Austen turned up and said, "No, that's my son, not hers," which kind of put an end to it in a way. And the investigators said that no, there is no evidence whatsoever of Princess Caroline behaving badly. Now, how much you would believe that is up to you. You could believe all of it, none of it, some of it, a bit of it, and we wouldn't know. I suspect that she had been so chaperoned and constrained in her youth that when she had some freedom, she really used it. You know, she saw who she wanted to see. She had parties. She invited people there. You know, whether sex was going on or not, she was taking her life back. And and of course, that was wrong for a woman, a particularly married woman, to do in that period. This is what I mean by like, I feel like she's a modern character, just stuck in the wrong time. Um, so the next thing that happens is we come back to 1814. She desperately wanted to go home. She desperately wanted to go back to Brunswick. But she couldn't because there was a war on. So Brunswick had been overrun by Napoleon. Um, all of Europe was at war, and there was literally no way for her to get there, nor any way for her to be safe if she went. So she was stuck in England. And in 1814, in March, April 1814, Napoleon was defeated and sent to Elba, a little island in the Mediterranean. And at that point, the way opened for her to get out of England, and she took it. 1814, June, our initial document there, they were arguing about giving her more money. And the subtext of that was, if we give her more money, she'll go away. And she did. She went, first of all, to Brunswick for a couple of weeks, but I think that was very difficult for her because it had been really damaged in the war. And she went from there to Italy. And she took a guide, which was very common for someone to have a local guide. And in this case, this was a man named Bartolomeo Pergami. And as you can see from this cartoon, her relationship with him was a bit suspicious, according to the people in Britain. So remember that although his sister was a countess, he was very much below her in rank. And although they traveled together, he organized everything, organized all her travel, organized all her accommodation, all of that kind of stuff. He was seen eating with her, which was, shocking. But also people said they saw them kiss and, blah, blah. Were they lovers? We don't know. Absolutely no idea. And this is the point where we get to a really difficult time in her life. And this is the point where I really start disliking the Prince Regent. When she left her husband, she had to leave her daughter. That she was allowed to see Charlotte, although as Charlotte got older, she was allowed to see her less and less, and only under supervised visits. And by 1814, Charlotte was a late teenager, and she couldn't take her with her. Charlotte was the property of the crown, basically. She was the Princess Royal. She was the heir to the throne after her father. And of course, her father was effectively king at this point. But, and this is the other thing about Caroline, she never had the duties of a queen during this regency period because Queen Charlotte was still alive. So the Prince Regent had the duties of a king, but his wife did not have the duties of a queen because the queen was still alive and so was her husband. So all the drawing rooms and so on during the Regency were Queen Charlotte's drawing rooms, and Princess Caroline wasn't welcome. But in 1817, she's living in Italy, and she gets news that Princess Charlotte has died. Her daughter dies in childbirth in November of 1817. Now, the reason this sets me against the Prince Regent is that he didn't tell her. He didn't write to her. He didn't send any official communication. She found out about it from an English traveller passing through. And I feel that that was an act of great cruelty. And then the king dies. George III dies. Prince Regent becomes George IV. And she returns to Britain. And they don't want her back, basically. Well, the king doesn't want her back. He doesn't want her anywhere near him. And she gets encouragement to come back from Sir Matthew Woods, who's the Lord Mayor of London, as this cartoon suggests. That figure in the background is Bartolomeo, being left on the shores of France. Sir Matthew Woods was not a nobleman. He'd ridden from being a draper's son. If you don't want to know more about him, look at the video about Easter. But he encouraged her to come back. And she did come back. But was she a queen? And this is the question. Prinny reckoned she wasn't a queen. She wasn't even a queen consort, which is the proper title for the wife of the monarch. She felt that she was a queen. And that led to some unfortunate incidents. She referred to herself as the injured queen, and she wanted that on her gravestone, and it actually is in Brunswick Cathedral. The reason that she thought she had a shot at it is because she was so popular, incredibly popular, just like Princess Diana was. And this was because she was a reformist. All classes will ever find in me a sincere friend to their liberties and a zealous advocate of their rights. So a huge amount of reform legislation was being promoted at this time. They got rid of Napoleon. They had time to look at things like slavery and Catholic emancipation and the poor relief bills, particularly after the 1816 year without a summer. And she was seen as being on the people's side rather than the side of the nobility and the powerful. And at this point, the king decides that he needs to divorce her. And the reason he needs to divorce her is because Charlotte died and he has no heir. Also, she's in London and it's driving him crazy. This cartoon is about how to get unmarried. There's the rub, and you have a whole lot of people pulling from one side. But look who Caroline is holding hands with. She's holding hands with Lady Justice. So in order to get divorced at this point, you have to have an act of parliament. Doesn't matter who you are. It's not just the king. Anybody who wants to get divorced has to have an act of parliament. And they bring an act of parliament to the House of Lords, and there is effectively a trial. This painting is called The Trial of Queen Caroline. And you can see that it's absolutely chock-a-block. People are there to witness as well as to argue. And effectively a whole lot of the evidence, supposedly, that was in the delicate investigation, plus all this stuff about what she was doing in Italy, came out, and it passed the House of Lords. But they didn't bother to send it to the House of Commons. So in order for an act to go through, it has to pass both Houses of Parliament. It passed the Lords, but it did not pass Commons because they never sent it to Commons because they knew it wouldn't get through, because Commons at that stage was mainly controlled by the people on her side, the reformists. And so the divorce did not happen. What did happen was the coronation. And so this is in 1821. The Prince Regent is crowned as George IV, and she is kept out of Westminster Abbey by the King. He tells her she's not going to be allowed to go in. She turns up anyway. She tries to get into 3 different doors, and at one point there are bayonets up like this against her throat, saying, no, not a step further, you can't go in. And this is why she refers to herself as the injured queen. But it's also why we call her Princess Caroline rather than Queen Caroline. She was never crowned. She never had the crown on her head. She never sat next to him on the throne. And so in popular discussion, she's referred to as Princess Caroline of Brunswick. She went home and she felt ill only a couple of weeks later. We don't know why she died. She was only 53. Possibly an obstruction of the bowels, possibly cancer. Some people said poison, seems unlikely. But she became very ill, and she knew she was dying. And unfortunately, she had all of her papers burnt. All her letters, her diaries, her documents, everything got burnt. She redid her will. And then she dies in August of 1821. And there is an enormous public outpouring of grief. Again, very much like Princess Diana. This is called Britannia Mourning the Loss of Her Late Injured Queen and History Recording Her Persecutions and Sufferings. They tried to have her funeral procession not go through London, and there was a riot. People were actually killed because they wanted it to go straight through Westminster. It was going to a ship because she wanted to be buried in Brunswick, and indeed she is buried in Brunswick Cathedral. But there was a huge, huge popular outpouring of grief. And they forced the funeral cortege to go right through the middle of London. And there were thousands and thousands of people on that last journey. So she seems to have been a person with a strong will and a real sense of what she was owed, but also a very generous person, someone who made friends easily, who was very kind, who was very affable and pleasant when she didn't matter who she was speaking to. She was not a snob. She was somebody who treated everybody that she met well, and that gained her an enormous amount of goodwill amongst everybody except the Prince Regent and his gang. So there's Caroline of Brunswick. This is my favorite portrait of her. I feel like you could pick that up and put it down in the 1920s and she'd fit in perfectly. And possibly even the 2020s. A woman out of time, perhaps, but certainly a woman who demanded to live her own life at a time when women were not allowed to do that at all. So I've ended up, I don't know if I like her, but I did end up admiring her for that. That's This Week in the Regency. I'm Elizabeth Leyden. I'll see you next week in the Regency.